The arena was loud, too loud. Thousands of fans screamed, cameras flashed, and the wrestler stood in the center of the ring, soaking in every second of attention like it was oxygen. He grabbed the microphone and smirked. "You know what I love?" he said, pacing in slow circles. "Breaking legends. Especially the fake ones." The crowd laughed. Then he stopped. His eyes locked onto someone near the ringside seats. A man standing calmly. No security. No entourage. Just a black jacket, hands relaxed, expression unreadable. Steven Seagal. The wrestler pointed at him. "You," he shouted. "Yeah, to you." Cameras immediately shifted. "That guy thinks he understands fighting." The wrestler laughed. Movies, scripts, stunt doubles. The crowd roared with approval. He wouldn't survive 10 seconds in this ring. The wrestler continued, shaking his head. "Not 10. Steven didn't react, didn't smile, didn't argue. He simply stood there, calm like the noise didn't exist. The wrestler mocked him again. "You hear me, old man? This isn't Hollywood. This is real." More laughter, more cheers, but something strange happened. Steven took one slow step forward, just one, and the people closest to the ring suddenly stopped laughing. The wrestler noticed it too. "Oh, what's wrong?" he sneered. "You gonna cry? Or call your stunt double?" Steven finally looked up. His voice was low, steady. "I didn't come here to fight." The wrestler grinned. "Good, because you'd lose." Steven paused. Then he said something that didn't match the chaos around him. "I came here to watch," he said quietly. "But if you want to learn, I can teach." The laughter faded just a little. The wrestler leaned over the ropes, narrowing his eyes. "Teach?" he scoffed. "You think you can handle the ring?" Steven didn't raise his voice, didn't change his posture. "I don't need to handle the ring," he replied. "I just need one moment." Silence rippled through the front rows. What happened next changed the entire night. The noise didn't disappear after Steven's last words, but it changed. It became uncertain. People whispered, phones tilted, and even the wrestler in the ring shifted his stance. Though he tried to hide it behind his grin, the arena lights flared brighter as music hit again. The announcer shouted the wrestler's nickname, hyping the moment like nothing unusual had just happened. But something had changed. The champion loved moments like this. He fed off embarrassment, not just victory. Anyone could win a match. Breaking a person's confidence publicly, that was his specialty. Earlier that night, he had shoved a rookie into the ropes and laughed while the crowd booed. He had mocked an injured veteran, calling him expired merchandise. The commissioners hated it, but ratings loved it, and tonight, he had found a new target. "Relax," the wrestler said into the mic, holding up his hand as if calming a child. "I don't bully seniors. That's not a good look." Laughter came again, but weaker this time. "I mean, look at him," he continued, pacing the ring slowly. Movie clothes, movie confidence, no ring scars, no tape on the wrists. He leaned against the ropes, pretending to inspect Steven from head to toe. "This ring is 30 feet wide, reinforced steel under every board, ropes tight enough to break ribs," he said. "This isn't some soft set with choreography." Steven listened, not like a fan, not like a challenger, like a man evaluating information. The referee stood nearby, unsure, checking with officials outside the ring. This wasn't on the card. This wasn't planned. Steven rested his hand on the edge of the ring apron. The canvas was rough, worn by years of real impact. He pressed his fingers lightly, almost thoughtfully, as if confirming something. The wrestler noticed and smiled wider. "See that?" he told the crowd. "He's thinking now." Steven looked up at him. "You talk a lot," Steven said. No insult, no anger, just observation. The crowd reacted, some cheers, some gasps. The wrestler laughed again, louder than necessary. "Of course I talk," he said. "Talking is part of winning. Talking is how you make people fear you before you touch them." Steven nodded once. "Fear works," he said. "For people who don't know control." That word control hit differently. The wrestler stepped closer to the ropes. "Control?" he mocked. "Control is when you pin someone and the ref counts 3. Steven shook his head slightly. "No," he said. "That's permission." The comment confused people. It wasn't loud enough to echo, but close enough for microphones to catch. The crowd leaned in without realizing it. The wrestler dropped the mic to the mat for a second and crouched, eyes level with Steven. You don't belong in here, he said quietly, so the cameras would have to zoom to hear. You're a guest. Don't forget it. Steven's expression didn't change. Respect isn't about where you belong, he replied. It's about how you stand. Security lingered near the aisle now. Officials whispered with the referee. The wrestler straightened up as if deciding something. He picked the mic back up. You know what? He said to the crowd. Let's have some fun. Cheers erupted. I've been fighting professionals my whole life, he continued. I break bones for money. And now this guy thinks he can teach me something? He laughed, pointing at Steven again. If he's so confident, the wrestler said. Why not step into the ring? Just for a moment. The lights dimmed slightly. The crowd buzzed. Steven hesitated, not because he was afraid, because he understood consequences. He stepped back half a step, then forward again. I don't need a match, he said. I don't need applause. The wrestler interrupted him. No match, he smirked. No rules. Just reality. The arena fell into a strange silence. Steven removed his watch and placed it carefully on the ringside table. That single detail changed everything. Not dramatic, not rushed, intentional. People closest to the ring felt it like the air had thickened. The referee raised his hands uncertainly. Officials watched closely. The wrestler bounced on his heels, smiling, convinced he was seconds away from humiliation that would go viral. Steven stepped closer to the steps, calm, balanced, and ready. The bell still hadn't rung, but everyone knew something irreversible was about to happen. The wrestler spread his arms wide, welcoming the noise as the crowd erupted again. Come on, he shouted. Make some room for the movie star. The referee stepped between them, palms raised. This isn't scheduled, he warned. We don't know his clearance. The wrestler waved him off. Relax. I'll keep it educational. Steven took the steel steps slowly, 1 foot at a time. No rushing, no drama. Each movement deliberate. The wrestler leaned against the ropes, smirking. Careful, he mocked. Those steps bite harder than stunt floors. Steven stepped through the ropes without answering. The moment his foot touched the canvas, the sound changed. The ring creaked softly, a subtle reminder that this place wasn't forgiving. The wrestler circled him immediately, bouncing, shoulders loose, hands ready. He was in his element now. You feel that? He said. That's real ground. No retakes here. Steven stood still, hands open, feet planted naturally. No pose. The crowd noticed the contrast. Bell! The wrestler shouted. The referee hesitated. Officials yelled from ringside. The crowd was screaming for it. Finally, ding. The bell rang. The wrestler rushed forward instantly. Testing him with a shove meant more to embarrass than injure. Steven moved half an inch. That shove missed its purpose. The wrestler frowned. Oh, so you can move, he said, laughing nervously. Good. He swung again, a wide, flashy strike meant for cameras. Steven stepped inside the motion. Not back. Inside. Grips connected. Wrist, elbow, shoulder alignment perfect. The wrestler froze. What the? Steven rotated his wrist slightly. Just slightly. A sharp gasp cut through the arena. The wrestler's bravado cracked for the first time. Hey, wait. Steven leaned close enough for only him to hear. You mistake aggression for dominance. The wrestler tried to pull free and made the worst possible choice. He pushed harder. Pain shot through his arm instantly. The crowd went quiet. Steven didn't slam him. Didn't rush. He guided him. A controlled step. A pivot. A pressure point activated with surgical precision. The wrestler's knees buckled. What are you doing? He muttered, panic slipping into his voice. Steven replied calmly, ending the lesson early. The wrestler tried to counter with raw strength, muscles flaring, adrenaline spiking. It didn't matter. Steven shifted his weight, one small turn of the hips. The wrestler lost balance completely, not thrown, but taken. His body hit the mat with a thunderous crack. The ring shook. A collective gasp rippled through the stands. The wrestler rolled instinctively, clutching his arm. Disbelief written across his face. No, get off, he stammered, trying to rise. Steven placed 1 foot near the wrestler's shoulder. Not on him, near him. Enough. You've spent your life being loud, Steven said. Silence feels unfamiliar. The wrestler swung blindly from the mat. Steven stepped away effortlessly. The referee hovered, torn between stopping it and not daring to interrupt. You good? Steven asked genuinely. The question confused everyone. The wrestler spat and tried to stand again. Mistake. Stephen caught him mid-rise. This time, there was no explanation. A clean redirect. A controlled lift. And then, down. Harder. The mat thundered again. Cameras jerked. The crowd surged to its feet. The wrestler didn't move this time. Stephen released the hold immediately and stepped back. Hands open again, signaling it was over. The referee dropped to one knee, checking the wrestler. Medical staff rushed forward. The bell rang again, not for victory, but for stoppage. The crowd stood frozen between shock and awe. Stephen looked around once, letting the moment settle. No celebration, no pose, just clarity. He stepped through the ropes, retrieved his watch, and fastened it calmly to his wrist. Behind him, the wrestler stared up at the lights, breathing hard, reality sinking in. The crowd finally erupted, not laughter this time, respect and confusion, because what they had just witnessed wasn't power on display, it was control, unleashed for only as long as necessary. And now, silence followed Steven Seagal out of the ring. For a few long seconds, no one spoke. The bell had rung, medical staff surrounded the fallen wrestler. The referee hovered, signaling frantically toward ringside. Yet the arena didn't explode the way it usually did. It froze. Thousands of people stood in total silence, trying to process what they had just seen. Phones that had been raised to record mockery now trembled in stunned hands. The champion, the man who had owned the crowd minutes earlier, remained flat on his back, eyes blinking slowly at the lights overhead. His chest rose and fell sharply, each breath heavier than the last. "What just happened?" someone whispered in the front row. Another voice answered, barely audible. He didn't even try. Stephen stood at the edge of the ring, one foot already stepping down onto the steel steps. He paused, not for applause, not for attention, but because he felt the weight of thousands of eyes finally seeing him differently. Not as a movie character, not as a challenge, as reality. The announcer lowered his microphone, unsure what he was supposed to say now. This wasn't in the script. There was no line for this moment. Cameras zoomed in on the wrestler's face. Confusion had replaced arrogance. His jaw tightened as understanding crept in, understanding that he had invited this, that he had demanded the lesson he was now lying under. "Easy," a medic said, checking his arm. "Don't move." The wrestler swallowed hard. Pain burned from his wrist to his shoulder. His pride burned worse. Across the ring, Stephen had stepped fully down onto the floor. He adjusted his jacket calmly, as though he'd just finished a quiet conversation rather than dismantled a man's confidence in less than a minute. The crowd began to murmur. Not cheers, not boos. Respect-filled disbelief. He didn't even raise his voice. Someone murmured. There was no anger, another said. High above, in the production booth, officials stared at their monitors in stunned silence. Replay screens showed the moment again in slow speed, the minimal movement, the precise timing, the effortless imbalance. "You see that?" one producer whispered. That wasn't luck. The referee climbed through the ropes, waving the match off officially. "This is over," he announced. His voice sounded smaller than usual, steadier but restrained. The wrestler was helped into a seated position at the corner. He wiped sweat from his brow, breathing hard, refusing to look toward Stephen. He didn't want to, because doing so would mean accepting the truth. Stephen stopped near the ramp. He turned not theatrically, not to acknowledge applause, but because he heard his name spoken aloud for the first time that night. Seagal. It came from a veteran coach seated ringside, a man who had trained fighters for decades. He gave Stephen a single nod. Recognition. Stephen returned the nod. That small exchange said more than any speech ever could. The crowd noticed. Clapping started slowly, uncertain at first, as if people were asking permission to react this way. Then it grew. Not wild cheering, but something stronger. Acknowledgement. Stephen raised one hand, but not in victory. In refusal. He gently lowered it again, signaling there was nothing to celebrate. This wasn't about winning. It never had been. The wrestler, now standing with assistants, finally looked toward Stephen. There was no anger in his eyes anymore, only disbelief, and something else, humility. He clenched his jaw, nodding once in reluctant acceptance. He had challenged something he didn't understand. Stephen met his gaze briefly. No glare, no smirk, just calm. Then he turned and continued up the ramp. The announcer finally found his voice. "Well," he said, swallowing, "I think we all learned something tonight." The statement felt inadequate, As Steven disappeared behind the entrance curtains, the arena didn't erupt. It stayed silent, thoughtful, because violence usually entertained them, but control had taught them something instead, and the reaction spread beyond the building. Clips were already being uploaded. Comment sections were filling with disbelief. Titles formed themselves without effort. Arrogance meets reality. Loud confidence versus quiet mastery. Inside the arena, the wrestler sat alone on the corner turnbuckle, icing his arm. For the first time in his career, he had nothing to say, and for the first time that night, nothing needed to be said. Backstage was chaos. Producers spoke over each other. Security replayed footage on cracked monitors, and phones buzzed non-stop with messages from executives who had just seen the clip explode online in real time. "What do we do?" someone asked. "No rules were broken," another replied quietly. "Not one." Outside, the arena was still buzzing, but in a different way now. Not hype, not frenzy, curiosity. On the ramp, Steven slowed his pace as a familiar voice called out behind him. "Mr. Seagal." He stopped. Two senior officials hurried toward him, credentials swinging from their necks. These weren't promoters chasing publicity. They were decision makers. One of them extended a hand. "We owe you an apology," he said. "That situation should never have escalated." Steven shook his hand calmly. "I understand ego," he replied. "It's easy to mistake noise for authority." The official nodded, clearly still processing what he had witnessed. "The wrestler crossed a line," he said. "Publicly. Repeatedly." Steven didn't answer, because the lesson had already been delivered. Nearby, the wrestler was being escorted down the ramp more slowly, arms supported, pride visibly fractured. The crowd parted instinctively, not mocking now, not chanting, just watching. When he reached Steven's position, the officials stopped. For a moment, no one spoke. The wrestler looked up at Steven. Up not physically, but emotionally. His voice, when it came, was hoarse. "I underestimated you," he said. "I thought strength was pressure, volume, speed." Steven studied him carefully. "No," Steven said. "Strength is restraint." The wrestler swallowed. "You could have hurt me worse. I chose not to," Steven replied. That landed harder than any slam. One of the officials cleared his throat. "For the record," he said, turning slightly toward the cameras that had begun circling. "Mr. Seagal is not an outsider here." The words rippled outward. "He's a guest consultant," the official continued, raising his voice just enough to be heard. "He's worked with our training partners for years. Tonight was unfortunate." Consultant. That single word changed the narrative instantly. Clips online reframed themselves in seconds. This wasn't a stunt. This wasn't a fluke. This was experience meeting arrogance. The wrestler nodded slowly. "You didn't embarrass me," he said quietly. "I did." Steven gave a small nod in return. "Then you learned." The crowd, sensing the gravity of the exchange, began to clap again, this time without confusion. Not worship, respect. Cameras zoomed in. "Is there anything you'd like to say?" a reporter shouted. Steven turned just slightly, not toward the camera, but toward the crowd. "Fighting isn't about proving something," he said. "It's about knowing when not to." That quote went viral before the night was over. Behind them, medical staff confirmed the wrestler could walk on his own. He straightened his posture slightly, no longer inflated, but grounded. One of the younger wrestlers backstage whispered to another, "Did you see how he moved?" "Barely moved," came the reply. "That's the scary part." High above, commentators filled the silence with nervous analysis, replaying the moment again and again in slow motion. "No wasted energy," one said. "No anger." The other added, "That wasn't a match. That was a demonstration." Steven was escorted toward a private exit now, not for safety but out of courtesy. As he walked, several fighters, real fighters, stood along the hallway. No words, just nods. Acknowledgement among men who understood. Just before stepping through the exit doors, Steven paused and looked back one final time toward the ring where arrogance had ruled, the ring where silence had won. Inside, the wrestler sat alone on a bench, taping ice to his arm, staring at the floor. Not defeated, changed. Steven turned and disappeared into the night, and by the time the arena lights dimmed, one truth had already spread everywhere. That power doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself, only when challenged. And tonight, the entire world had witnessed the difference. The arena slowly began to empty. not with the usual rush of cheers and noise, but with subdued conversations, voices low, movements thoughtful. People didn't leave laughing or chanting. They left reflecting. In the locker room hallway, the wrestler sat on a bench, his gear half removed. His arm was wrapped, ice pressing into bruised skin that hadn't fully begun to swell yet. The pain was sharp, but it was clean, honest pain. What weighed heavier was the silence around him. No reporters pushed past security. No teammates joked or clapped him on the back. For the first time in years, there was nothing to perform. A veteran coach approached him quietly and handed him a bottle of water. "You okay?" he asked. The wrestler nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "I think so." The coach sat beside him. "You know why you lost footing?" The wrestler shook his head. "Because you were trying to dominate," the coach replied. "Not control." Those words echoed something Steven had said earlier. The wrestler exhaled slowly, absorbing it without defending himself. Across the building, in a small office away from cameras, officials reviewed the incident once more. Not for punishment, but for understanding. "No rules broken," one said again. "Just pride," another nodded. "And pride lost. There would be fines, public apologies, quiet conversations. Not because Steven demanded them, but because the situation demanded accountability. Steven himself wasn't in the building anymore. He rarely stayed after lessons were delivered. Outside, the night air was cool. Steven stood near his car, listening to the distant hum of traffic. No escort, no crowd, just stillness. One of the senior officials stepped out to see him off. "You could have humiliated him further," he said. "Many would have." Steven shook his head. "Humiliation teaches nothing," he replied. "Balance does." The official smiled faintly. "You changed the room tonight?" Steven paused. "No," he corrected. "I exposed it." Inside the locker room, the wrestler stood now, flexing his fingers carefully. He tested his grip, slower than usual. Intentional. A younger wrestler approached hesitantly. "That was different," he said. "You okay?" The champion looked at him, really looked. "Yeah," he said. "I needed it." The younger wrestler blinked, surprised. "You mean?" I forgot why I started fighting," the champion said. "It wasn't to be loud." The younger man nodded and walked away quietly. Later that night, a brief statement was released. No spin, no excuses. Tonight reminded us that respect matters, inside and outside the ring. We accept responsibility, and will move forward better. It spread quickly. People noticed the tone. Steven never commented on it. He didn't need to. In training facilities across the country, clips from the incident played on muted televisions. Fighters re-watched movement instead of impact, timing instead of force. "Notice the feet," one coach said. "His hands barely moved," another pointed out. The lesson outlived the spectacle. Weeks later, the wrestler returned to the ring. Fans watched closely. He didn't strut. He didn't mock. He fought cleaner, slower, smarter. The commentary changed too. "There's discipline now," one analyst said. "He's not chasing dominance. He's managing it." And somewhere, far from the arena, Steven continued his life untouched by the noise he had left behind. To him, the night was closed. A question had been asked. An answer had been given. No grudges, no trophies, just correction. Because real victories don't echo with cheers. They settle quietly and change people long after the lights go out. By morning, the internet had already decided what the night meant. Clips were everywhere. Slowed down, analyzed, paused frame by frame. Titles argued over words like shock, humiliation, lesson. But most people noticed something simpler, something that felt unfamiliar in a world addicted to noise. There was no celebration, no taunting, no victory pose, just a man who proved a point without needing to announce it. That detail lingered longer than the slam ever did. Comment sections filled up quickly. Some praised technique, others talked about ego. But the most common phrase appeared again and again. Real power doesn't need volume. The night had exposed something many people recognized far beyond the ring. We live in a time where confidence is often loud, where dominance is performed, and where respect is demanded rather than earned. The wrestler had represented that mindset perfectly, believing strength was force, that control came from overwhelming others. Steven represented the opposite. He didn't arrive to conquer. He didn't arrive to compete. He arrived prepared, in case he was challenged. And when that challenge came, his response wasn't rage, it was clarity. That's what made the moment uncomfortable for many viewers, because it wasn't just about a wrestler being outmatched. It was about arrogance meeting truth, about confidence being tested by competence, in workplaces, in classrooms, in everyday life. How many times do people talk themselves into authority? How often do we confuse confidence with capability? The silence after the moment mattered more than the moment itself. People didn't cheer because deep down, they weren't witnessing entertainment anymore. They were witnessing accountability. And accountability isn't always fun to watch. The wrestler changed because he was allowed to. He wasn't destroyed. He wasn't publicly executed by mockery. He was corrected with restraint. That's a rare kind of power, one that leaves room for growth. Stephen walked away because there was nothing left to prove. The lesson was already planted. He didn't demand apologies. He didn't seek control over the narrative. He trusted time to do what force never could. Today, weeks later, the clip still resurfaces. Not because it's explosive, but because it's sobering. People share it with captions like, "Watch his hands," or "This is what discipline looks like." The story slowed people down, and maybe that's the real takeaway. That true strength doesn't rush. It doesn't shout. It doesn't perform. It waits. It listens. And when necessary, it acts precisely. If there's one lesson the ring taught that night, it's this. You don't need to tear someone down to stand taller. You don't need to be loud to be strong. And you don't need approval when you are grounded in skill. Respect isn't demanded, it's revealed. So the next time you see someone underestimating others, or feel tempted to prove yourself through noise, remember what silence can do. If this story made you think, type "respect" in the comments. And tell us where you're watching from, because quiet strength exists everywhere.